I'd just like to start by saying that the reason we're having the talk today towards the end of the exhibition, not at the beginning, is because Rena was working for National Geographic in January in Puerto Rico. So Costa Rica. So it wasn't possible for her to come to the talk when Tessa, the other great photographer whose works upstairs, gave her talk at the opening. And so that's why we're doing something a bit different this time round and having two talks rather than two people at the same time. So it's great that you've all come, and I'd like to introduce Rena and get Rena to start talking about this wonderful work and what she's been doing as a photographer.
Hello, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. It's my first time in Newcastle. I've literally just come off the train and saw a beautiful medieval tower. Haven't had the chance to see much, but it looks like a beautiful city. I'm originally from Azerbaijan, from Baku. I don't know how many of you have heard of Azerbaijan. And I live in Istanbul now. And this work combines three different projects. One of the first projects is from my home country, it's from Azerbaijan. It's from the village in the mountains called Khinalik. It's the highest populated point in my country. And it's a village of about 1,000 shepherd families that speak the language that nobody else in the world speaks. It's one of these dying languages. And I've been going there since 2003, so for quite a long, for about 15 years, and I've been observing how, life is changing in this village. It's so high up and so inaccessible in the winter. 9 months out of the year, the village is literally inaccessible because the roads get snowed in. In fact, up until 2006, they had no roads. You had to cross rivers on these Russian army military jeeps, to get there for hours, and you get stuck in the river, so it's not even guaranteed that you even get there. But in 2006, the president of our country decided to visit, and they built the road. And finally you could access the village. And so since then I was able to actually, drive on the asphalted road in the summer, but winter's still difficult. So people live there without any basic amenities. There are no modern toilets. There's no water in the kitchen. There's no gas, so they have to haul water from the nearest spring. And in the winter months, it's really difficult because the water is really cold. So and much of this burden falls upon women because they're the ones who run the household. So I always questioned why, it's so difficult. It's such a small community. Why do they keep? It's always, for me, it's always the biggest question. Why do they keep living there? Because it's almost, impossible to have, the comforts that we're all used to having. They don't have that. But then I realized that there is a sense of pride that if they leave, the village will die, like literally die, and the history will vanish forever. I mean, and this village has been inhabited for millennia. If you dig through the, the cemetery ground, you see 7 layers of history. So it's this pride that kind of unites the 3 projects that are on display here. The same pride and the same deep connection with the homeland that unites the farmers, the last remaining peasants. They call them the last peasants of Europe in Maramuresh in Romania, which I also visited in 2011 and 12. And again, most of the youth have gone out to work elsewhere in Western Europe in construction, easier jobs and more money rather than working with the land. But one of the questions I asked there, why do you keep working? Why do you keep attending to your land? And they said, if we leave, the land will die. It's our land, so they have to keep it alive. And the project is about the culture of haymaking. And I don't know if you probably know or not, but for example, UK has lost most of its hay meadows. And hay meadows, it's one of these natural phenomena that are highly dependent on human care. It's the only example in nature where man and nature can live in symbiosis. We have to tend to the hay meadow, we have to take care of it in order for the hay meadow to survive. And that's exactly what these people are doing. And the third project is from Chernobyl. It's over there on your left or right? Left.
Whenever.
Depends which way you're sitting. But that project. So I went there in 2010, and in an area which is now the exclusion zone, where most people have left after the nuclear disaster in 1986. You have about 200 women, mostly elderly women, still living because after the accident, they refused to abandon their homes. Simple as that. They didn't want to leave their orchards and houses, and they went back and they resettled. And they still continue living there to this day. And these women, in spite of all the hardships of loneliness, isolation, and lack of basic services, the nearest hospital is miles away. They still continue living, and of course radiation, that is the biggest invisible enemy. And they still continue living there because they take pride, and then they have this deep connection with homeland. Sorry, I've been talking too long.
No. They want to hear.
Yeah.
So how do you find these places to go to? Is it something you're commissioned to go and do? Or is it just you're inquisitive?
Yeah, there's a combination of both. In fact, in a very funny way. Hinalik is something that so I went there on my own. It was a personal project. I've always wanted to go. And I went for the first time in 2003, and I kept going back. I went 2006, 2009, 2018. I kept going back on my own without any commissions. But then I was able to publish the work in magazines, and then with those funds I was able to return. And then, because of this work in Hinalik, National Geographic assigned me to go to Transylvania because they saw some similarities between the two places. So I approached them with an idea about a different project in Georgia, and they said, how about Carpathian Mountains? And this was my first assignment for the National Geographic magazine, was to go and photograph the culture of haymaking. And in fact, it was a funny story because they sent me somewhere different in the region. They sent me to a Hungarian area, and the idea was to photograph this bucolic landscape, a place where not much has changed, where everything looks almost medieval. And I arrive in that area and I see, antennas and people wearing tracksuits and driving SUVs and using tractors to make hay. And I said, well, this is gone. There's that, the fairy tale that you're describing is just simply not there. Can I please do my own research? And can I, see if I can find it? So for a week, I've been chasing the fairy tale in that region, and I could not find it. And then I simply Googled Transylvania, hay, those two words in Google. And then pictures, probably some of Tessa's pictures came up, I don't know. Pictures started coming up, and I started researching, where is that? And I found Maramuresh, so I called my editor and I said, I found this other place, I have a hunch, it's gonna be what you want. Can I go there instead? They said, is it still in Transylvania? I said, yes. So I drove 6 hours north towards Carpathian Mountains and found this, and then called my editor very happy saying, this is it. And apparently I was not the only one who found this fairy tale. Prince Charles loves going there and make hay. He makes hay with people from these villages where I've met the farmers. They all have pictures with Prince Charles making hay. It's incredible, yeah. And he, in fact, even bought some houses in this tiny village of Breb, and they said that's the house of Prince Charles. I'm like, it's not very well kept. So yeah, it's one of those places where you kind of lose the sense of time because the people still use the same. And Chernobyl was an assignment from another magazine. It was an American magazine called More, and the magazine focused on stories about women, and that's why I went.
Do you find you get different kind of access as a woman to these communities?
I think as a woman photographer in general, it's easier, a little bit easier for us because we're not as threatening as men. You can easily walk into people's homes, into their intimate spaces. Men, they can as well, but it's maybe, I don't know, maybe it's harder, it takes longer to convince people to trust you. I think women in general are kind of more welcomed, especially if you working on a story about other women
Yeah.
or women and children, so it's kind of easy. That barrier that you have to overcome is not there. I mean, it depends on the situation.
So when you would go to these places, would you be alone or would you be working with a translator and a driver?
It depends. I was alone because I spoke the language, even though they could not believe that I was from Azerbaijan because I had a camera. They thought, when you put a camera on, you're like a space alien. You know, immediately, like, which planet are you from? It's always like that. So they could not believe that I was one of, you know. But in Transylvania, I had to use a translator because I didn't speak Romanian. Very nice translator who helped me a lot. And in Chernobyl, I was working with an American writer who had a translator. I spoke the language, but she had a translator. So the three
you
of
speak
us,
Russian as well?
I speak Russian, yeah. So the three of us were kind of running around. It was almost like a video game, finding inhabitants in a place that's the size of Long Island, and there are 200 of them. I mean, they're 30 kilometers in radius, right? So how do you find 200 people in 30 kilometers? You look a lot, like we were driving, I see a woman, and then we would literally chase these babushkas, we call them babushkas in Russian, the old ladies, the grannies. We were chasing these grannies around the snowy landscape of Chernobyl, and then finally finding them and kind of inviting ourselves to their homes. But they were very happy to see us because they were lonely and bored, and you know, they were happy to see.
There are no children around, no husbands around?
No children, absolutely. No. In fact, the only condition that these women were allowed to return back was that they were past the birth-giving age, which in Ukraine might be slightly lower than here. You know, like if you're 30 in Ukraine, you're an old mother. Same in Azerbaijan, where I'm from. But if you're past birth-giving age, I would imagine somewhere in around 40s or something, they were allowed to go back, like if you don't plan on having more children, because of the way radiation can affect your body. So most of the women there are elderly. In fact, I met an incredible woman called Anna. She was so, I don't know, full of life. You know, she was 80 years old when I met her, or 78 when I met her. And she had survived Holodomor. Holodomor was the Stalin-imposed famine on the Ukraine in the 30s. She survived that. She was 6 months old baby when her neighbors wanted to eat her. They wanted to, because people resorted to cannibalism out of hunger. She survived the Holocaust. She survived the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. She was running around with a stick, and then I saw a falcon. There's a picture of a falcon over there that she beat down because the falcon was stealing her chickens. And I said, Anna, why did you hang them up like this? Because I want the other falcons to know what I will do to them if they try to steal my chickens. So she was, you know, full of life and spirit, and it was incredible. You know, I kept asking them, are you not afraid of radiation? And they would tell me, what about starvation? That's the real threat. You know, radiation is just, it's nothing we can see.
Yeah.
You know.
So can you tell us something about growing up in Soviet era?
Soviet, oh my God. I can write a novel about that.
And how you came to follow photography?
Well, I grew up in Soviet Union. I think I was 14 or 15 when it broke apart in 1991, but I grew up in a family of dissidents. So, you know, when I came to my father and said, "You're not my real father, Lenin is," he was like, "I'll show you who your real father is." So it was you know a period of history that we witnessed. I think it's incomparable to anyone else's because of how drastic the changes were. You know, I was born in one country, and then I one day woke up in a different country. You know, and then of course neighbors went to wars against each other, and you know everything was overhauled. And the way I felt it was all in my school, all around my school, because we found ourselves with books that were no longer relevant, and without the new books that were written yet. We were in the gap. So the old books we couldn't use, and the new books haven't been yet brought to us. So the teachers would just make things up. They would just read from their own notes. Every day they would invent a lesson, because they could not refer back to the same, because everything was brought to us and taught to us through the prism of ideology,
Yeah.
of socialist and Soviet ideology. And then that was abolished overnight, and then there was nothing to replace it with. So it was kind of a gap in which we all fell, and we were trying to reinvent ourselves in a way that we didn't know how.
Yeah.
We didn't have the tools. So that was something very interesting. How I came to photography was later. In fact, funny story. I was working at the US Embassy at the time. I was an economic specialist.
In Baku.
My job was to read local newspapers and write journalistic reports about what goes on in the country, and these reports would go to the State Department and then get leaked into the WikiLeaks in the end, eventually. So that was my job. I was writing these reports, and on my desk I received an invitation, 2 invitations. One was to the first McDonald's restaurant opening in Azerbaijan. It was a very big deal. This is like the Soviet Union just ended. And the other one was an exhibition by Magnum Agency. I don't know if any of you are familiar with. It was called East of Magnum. It was an exhibition about life after the Berlin Wall fell. And I considered for a while, where should I go? The president of the country went to McDonald's. All my friends went to McDonald's. And I decided, I'll go to this Magnum thing. That sounds interesting. So I went to that exhibition and I saw the pictures. I saw the pictures of my reality, something I grew up in, taken by photographers who had this vision, who had a special eye, who had the ability to document history, and then I was amazed. I was amazed at the visual power, at the power of storytelling that photography can have. And then at the time I was painting, so I called up my painting teacher, said, that's it, no more painting. I'm going to pick up a camera, and that's how it started. And I did, yeah.
And what was the journey you went on? Did you go into education, or did you start publishing?
I didn't formally study photography. I went to a photographer who taught me how to use a darkroom and how to develop film and make prints. And he critiqued my work, and we looked at books. So it was just, one studio and one photographer, so I kept going like twice a week. And then I decided I wanted to work on a project in my own neighborhood, because a lot was changing in the city where I was born and grew up, Baku, because of the oil investment, the oil money, foreign investment was coming in. And the neighborhood that I was living in was a historic neighborhood. And that was basically, the face of it has been wiped out and replaced by new high-rises that came in with all the oil money. So literally the physical face of the city has changed. And I decided to document those changes, the urban change. And that project then won me my first award as a photographer, and then that's how it continued.
And that became a book?
Later on became a chapter in a book, my first book called Pipe Dreams, which documents the journey along the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline that takes oil from Azerbaijan to Turkey, the Turkish Bay of Ceyhan, and then onwards to Europe. So I traveled along the way of this pipeline and photographed people who live in the vicinity of the pipeline.
And why did you move to Turkey, to Istanbul?
I moved there, I consider it a promotion because I used to live in Cairo, and Cairo is a very difficult city. It's a wonderful city, but it's a really difficult city to live. Just kind of it's sort of offensive on many levels, on all your senses. So it's really full on. And I needed something that's more manageable, and I speak Turkish, and I always loved Istanbul, always loved the culture and the city, the food, and everything about it. So, and it's so well located and so well connected with the world. So I decided I should move there.
So do you shoot in Turkey, or?
Sometimes, yeah.
Are you on assignment? How often?
I'm very often on assignment somewhere else. And because Istanbul is so well connected, it's very easy. There's direct flights almost everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's easy to travel, and I don't really have a region on which I focus. It's really all over the place, which is I like that. I like that. Yeah. Coronavirus might change that. We'll see.
This might be the last opening. Clear of it. But what I was going to say about these agricultural scenes is it seems to be kind of otherworldly in that there's not a lot of technology apparent in them. You don't see phone wires, you don't see mobile phones, and that's something as a photographer you're always contending with. It's either part of the photograph or you're trying to not have it.
Crop it out. With a few viewfinder, No, I mean, certainly there is some of that. I mean, I don't know if you see those two girls in miniskirts, in traditional miniskirts. One of them is clutching a smartphone, if you look closer. But the thing is, people, I mean, there are these changes, of course, they happen. But at the same time, what I found there, for instance, is that people still took pride. I mean, these two young girls, they dressed up the same way as their great-grandmothers used to dress up when they go to church. So they take pride in that dress. And then even though they have these shoes that are not from the great-grandmother era, they're obviously high heel and fancy shoes of today, and they have the smartphones, they still, they take pride in the culture. There's this, another picture in the back next to the one with a horse where women are washing carpets. It's a medieval washing machine. It was invented in the 15th century, and people still bring blankets and they throw their blankets in the washing machine operated by a river stream. No electricity needed, no energy wasted. It's just a river stream, and that washing machine is connected. The same stream of water that kickstarts this washing machine also jump-starts a wool combing machine where they comb the blankets, and then the whole thing in the end is connected to a brandy distillery where, I mean, it's all in one aggregate where they make brandy, they distill brandy out of plum fruit. So it's this ingenious zero waste incredible machinery that's come from the Middle Ages, and they still use it today. It's not for tourists. These people bring their own blankets from their own homes to wash, and they distill the brandy and they drink it. It's part of the culture, So that's something that I found just incredible, that it still exists. It's something that we need to treasure. I mean, a lot of the homes that I saw, the old traditional wooden homes, are being replaced with cement homes and tin roofs. Because apparently there are a lot of Italians who love to buy these homes and take them to Italy and reassemble them. And they're quite, cheap. It's like a 2,000–3,000 euro. You can have a Maramurush home, which is really sad. Like the gates and the homes, everything is going away from the landscape. But the culture somehow still perseveres, and I hope it will continue. I treasure it as a photographer. I really treasure it. I'm not anti-progress, but when I see something like this, as you probably know, you just want to document it, you want to capture it and preserve it somehow, at least in pictures. And same here. I mean, you can see in this village where the roof of each home is a courtyard of another home. They're all built like steps into the sky, built into the slope of the mountain. You can see tin roofs shining in some edges, And there are many changes. They now have a wedding hall. Instead of the wedding taking over the village, they now have one place where they have all the weddings. So these changes are inevitable, but for as long as we can document some of these traditions and keep them alive somehow.
Well, what do the women, especially the young women, think of you going there so sporadically over many years and then living abroad now and pursuing a career which really they probably wouldn't even understand?
It depends. Last time I went there in 2018, I was surprised to see my pictures on the walls of people's homes. And I have given some of them my pictures, but those were not the ones I've given them. And how did you get them? And they were like, Instagram. You didn't have a road in 2006, and now everyone. I mean, they have an how do you call them? The antenna So they have the connection. Before they didn't have TV or phones, and now they have all of that. And one of the girls, what is the picture? That's one in the Green Hills. That family, in fact, I made another picture in 2018. These 4 children are now grown up, and one of them is an IT teacher in a school in the village, and the boy was the one who printed the picture, this picture, from the Instagram, and put it on the wall of his house. So, you know, these things change, but again, the fact that they're still there, and the fact that one of the children grew up and is a teacher in a village school, tells me that they take pride, you know, in where they come from, and they don't intend to, you know, not all of them intend to flee, and because that's something that we are all facing, you know. One day, I think the youth, like more and more, is fleeing away from the countryside and looking for jobs in the urban areas, and I think essentially many of these people, they're the ones who feed us also, because a lot of the agriculture is out there, and sustainable agriculture is there. So I don't know what's the future. I mean, I've been doing a story about coffee recently for Nat Geo, and that's when I went to that's why I went to Costa Rica. And the future of coffee is also
in the balance.
Yeah, because again, it's hard work and it's manual work, because in order to get good coffee, you have to harvest it by hand. Why? Because coffee is cherries on the tree, and on the single branch you have green cherries and red cherries, and only red cherries should be collected, because if you get the green, it will spoil the batch and you get Nescafe. Sorry. But in order to get really, really good coffee, it has to be, you know, it has to be collected by hand. Okay? So a lot of youth is, you know, not looking forward as their, you know, to their futures as farmers. You know, that you need to entice them. Like there needs to be programs to entice them, to make sure they don't go away from that they inherit these farms and continue. And then we won't have a coffee. We will have some kind of synthetic replacement. You know, that's one of the things. The rural spaces, they're shrinking. The urban spaces take over. So.
We'd like to thank Rena for coming over.
Makes these little pastry things for as well.
I will try.